My granddaughter slapped me across the face at my 70th birthday dinner and screamed that I was nothing but a burden who should have died years ago. I fell against the corner of the mahogany sideboard, my reading glasses cracking beneath me. Blood trickling from a split lip onto the cream silk blouse I had bought especially for that evening. 23 people watched in frozen silence. Not one of them moved to help me up. What my granddaughter didn't know, what none of them knew, was that by sunrise the next morning, her entire world would be dismantled brick by brick. When she finally checked her phone at 8:47 in the morning, she would find 89 missed calls, 31 voicemails, and a certified letter waiting at her front door that would change the rest of her life. My name is Eleanor Whitcomb, and for 42 years I ran Whitcomb Publishing out of a brick building on Boylston Street in Boston. I built that company from a single desk and a borrowed typewriter into one of the most respected independent publishing houses on the East Coast. I raised my daughter Margaret alone after my husband David passed from a heart attack at 46. And when Margaret died of ovarian cancer at 38, leaving behind a frightened little girl with blonde pigtails and a teddy bear she refused to let go of. I became everything to that child. Mother, father, grandmother, home. My granddaughter Caroline was 9 years old when she came to live with me in the brownstone on Beacon Hill. She cried every night for 3 months. I would sit on the edge of her canopy bed and read her chapters from Anne of Green Gables until her breathing slowed and the tears dried on her pink cheeks. I paid for her private school at Windsor. I paid for her ballet lessons, her horseback riding at the stables in Hamilton, her summers at camp on Lake Winnipesaukee. When she wanted to study art history at Brown, I wrote the check without blinking. When she married Preston Ashford, the son of a Connecticut insurance dynasty, I gave them the down payment on a 5-bedroom colonial in Wellesley and a honeymoon in the Amalfi Coast. When she decided she wanted to start her own boutique literary agency, I handed her a trust fund of nearly $2 million and made her a vice president at Whitcomb Publishing with a corner office overlooking the Common. I gave her everything I had to give. And on the night of my 70th birthday, she gave me a split lip and a cracked rib in front of 23 witnesses. The dinner was held at my brownstone, the same house where Caroline had grown up, the same dining room where she had blown out candles on 21 birthday cakes. I had hired caterers from a little French place in the South End. I wore pearls that had belonged to my mother. My longtime attorney Harrison Pike was there, a man I had known for 35 years. So was my accountant Franklin Delacqua, and my oldest friend Dorothy Chamberlain, and 3 senior editors from the company, and Caroline's in-laws, the Ashfords, and Preston's business partners, and a handful of neighbors from Beacon Hill who had watched Caroline grow up. Caroline arrived 40 minutes late. She walked through my front door in a champagne-colored dress that cost more than most people earn in a month. Her hair swept up in a chignon, her wrist flashing with the diamond tennis bracelet I had given her for her 30th birthday. Preston followed behind her, adjusting his cufflinks, not meeting my eyes. Their 3-year-old son Theodore was not with them. When I asked where my great-grandson was, Caroline waved her hand dismissively and said the nanny had him. I should have known something was wrong the moment she walked in. She didn't hug me. She didn't wish me a happy birthday. She scanned the room the way a hawk scans a field, looking for prey. When we sat down to dinner, I found my name card had been moved. I had placed myself at the head of the table, as was custom, but Caroline had rearranged things. My card now sat at the far end, near the door to the kitchen, while hers had been placed at the head. I didn't say anything. I simply picked up my plate and walked to the seat she had assigned me. Dorothy caught my eye from across the table and gave me a look that said, "We will talk about this later." I nodded and tried to smile. The first course was served, the second. By the time the sommelier poured the wine to accompany the lamb, Caroline had already finished her second glass of Bordeaux. Her cheeks were flushed. Preston was murmuring something to her under his breath, but she waved him off. Then, somewhere between the salad and the main course, Caroline stood up. She lifted her glass, and for a moment I thought she was going to make a toast. My heart swelled a little. I thought perhaps she was going to say something kind after all. "I'd like to make an announcement," she said, and her voice was loud enough to cut through every conversation at the table. The room went quiet. "Preston and I have decided it's time for some changes at Whitcomb Publishing. As of next Monday, I will be assuming the role of Chief Executive Officer. My grandmother has done wonderful work over the years, but frankly, the company needs new blood. It needs a vision that isn't stuck in 1985. My hand tightened around my wine glass. I felt the blood drain from my face. Harrison Pike set his fork down very carefully. Franklin Delacroix's mouth opened slightly. Dorothy's eyes went wide. Caroline, I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. This is neither the time nor the place. We can discuss the future of the company in my office on Monday morning. No, she said, and she smiled the way a person smiles when they think they have already won. We're going to discuss it now, because frankly, Grandma, you've had your time. You're 70 years old. You should be at a cottage in Nantucket, knitting or whatever it is you do. You're embarrassing yourself by clinging to a company that needs to modernize. I stood up slowly. My knees were trembling, but I kept my chin high. Caroline, I am going to ask you to sit down and apologize to everyone at this table. And then you and I are going to have a private conversation. She laughed, a short, ugly, barking laugh that I had never heard from her before. And then she walked, very deliberately, from her seat at the head of the table to where I was standing near the kitchen door. You don't get to tell me what to do anymore, she said. Her voice was low, dangerous. Do you know how humiliating it's been working under you? Everyone treating me like the boss's granddaughter? Do you know how Preston's family laughs at us behind our backs because you still control everything? You're a burden. You should have died years ago, like Mom did, and let the rest of us live our lives. The words hit me harder than any physical blow could have. I actually gasped. I took a step back and my hip bumped against the sideboard. And then she raised her hand and slapped me across the face. The sound of it cracked through the dining room like a gunshot. My head snapped sideways. My reading glasses flew off and hit the edge of the sideboard. I lost my footing. I fell, hard, my shoulders slamming into the corner of the furniture, my head hitting the wood floor. I felt something crack in my chest. I felt warm blood on my lip. I tasted iron. For perhaps 3 full seconds, nobody moved. I lay there on the floor of the dining room I had decorated with my own hands, in the house I had paid for with my own work, and I looked up at my granddaughter, standing over me with her champagne-colored dress and her diamond bracelet and her face twisted into something I no longer recognized. And I understood something very clearly. For the first time in my life, this child, whom I had loved more than my own breath, was not my family anymore. She had stopped being my family the moment she decided I was a burden rather than a blessing. Harrison Pike was the first to move. He pushed his chair back, stood up, and walked around the table. Dorothy was right behind him. They knelt beside me. Harrison took my arm gently. Dorothy pressed a linen napkin to my lip. Eleanor, Harrison said, can you stand? Can you move everything? I can stand, I whispered. I did not cry. Every fiber in me wanted to, but I refused to give Caroline that satisfaction. Harrison and Dorothy helped me to my feet. I straightened my blouse. I smoothed down my hair. I looked around the dining room at the faces of 23 people, all of them frozen in horror. And then I looked at my granddaughter. Caroline, I said, and my voice did not shake. You have made your announcement. Now, I will make mine. You will leave this house tonight, and you will never set foot in it again. You will not come to my funeral. You will not inherit so much as a teaspoon from my estate. You thought tonight was your coronation. It was your execution. Preston rose from his seat. Eleanor, please. She's had too much to drink. Let's not do anything rash. Preston, I said, turning to him. You married a woman you believed was going to inherit an empire. Let me save you some time. She will not. Now, get her out of my house. I did not wait for a response. I turned, walked past them all with as much dignity as I could summon, and climbed the stairs to my bedroom. I locked the door behind me, and only then, only in the safety of my own room with the lock turned, did I allow myself to sit down on the edge of my bed and weep. But I only wept for 4 minutes. Then I wiped my face. I changed out of my blood-stained blouse. I splashed cold water on my cheek. I picked up the phone on my nightstand, and I called Harrison Pike, who was still downstairs in my foyer. "Harrison," I said, "come upstairs. Bring Franklin. We're going to work tonight." By midnight, my dining room had been cleared of guests and transformed into a war room. Harrison had brought his briefcase up from his car. Franklin was on his laptop. I sat at the head of my own table now, a cup of strong black coffee in front of me, an ice pack pressed to my ribs. Here is what my granddaughter did not understand about my company and about me. 42 years ago, when I built Whitcomb Publishing from nothing, I wrote the founding documents myself with the help of a young Harvard Law graduate named Harrison Pike. I was a woman in 1984 starting a business, which meant I had fought for every contract, every line of credit, every inch of ground. I had learned early not to trust easily. And when I eventually brought Caroline into the company, when I made her a vice president and gave her a corner office and a six-figure salary, I did not give her ownership of anything. Not a single share. Whitcomb Publishing was held inside a private trust. The trust named me as sole trustee during my lifetime, with the power to designate and revoke beneficiaries at my own discretion, in writing, at any time. Caroline had been listed as the sole secondary beneficiary. She would have inherited everything. The company, the brownstone, the Nantucket cottage, the art collection, the investment portfolio, everything my life had built. She had signed an employment contract 5 years earlier that I had personally reviewed. It contained a morality clause. It contained a termination for cause provision. It contained a non-compete agreement. It contained a clause voiding any severance in the event of assault, threat, or public conduct damaging to the company's reputation. Her trust fund, the $2 million I had given her, had been structured as an irrevocable disbursement with one critical exception. If she were ever convicted of a crime against me, or if I filed a sworn affidavit of elder abuse, the trust would collapse back into my estate. Franklin had drafted that clause 15 years ago, when I had first sensed, very faintly, that Caroline was growing entitled. The down payment on the house in Wellesley had been structured as a loan, callable at my discretion. Preston had signed the note, so had Caroline. The 23 people in my dining room had included my attorney, my accountant, and my oldest friend, all of whom had witnessed the assault. Dorothy had been filming on her phone, capturing Caroline's video birthday toast for the family album. She had captured the entire incident. I did not need to file criminal charges to dismantle Caroline's life. I only needed to lift a pen. By 2 o'clock in the morning, Harrison had drafted the termination letter. By 3 o'clock, Franklin had contacted our banking partners and frozen access to Caroline's company credit cards and corporate accounts. By 4 o'clock, he had drafted the demand letter for the immediate repayment of the Wellesley House loan, a sum of $680,000. By 5 o'clock, I had signed the sworn affidavit collapsing the trust fund. By 6 o'clock, Harrison had drafted the new beneficiary designation naming 3 charities, 2 of my senior editors, and my great-grandson Theodore, with Theodore's share placed in a protected trust administered by Harrison until Theodore's 25th birthday, fully shielded from Caroline's influence. At 7:30 in the morning, I walked out my front door and personally handed a sealed envelope to a bonded courier. The envelope was addressed to Caroline at the Colonial in Wellesley. Inside were the termination letter, the trust collapse notice, the loan demand, the restraining order petition, and a single photograph Dorothy had taken on her phone, a photograph of me lying on the floor of my dining room with blood on my lip. I went back inside. I drank a second cup of coffee, and then I slept for the first time in 24 hours without dreaming, with the sun streaming through the curtains of the same bedroom where I had rocked my granddaughter to sleep 30 years before. At 8:47 that morning, Caroline woke up. I would learn the details later from Preston, who called me a week after, weeping, begging for a sliver of mercy that was not mine to give. She had woken up with a hangover. She had reached for her phone. She had seen the missed calls, 89 of them. 31 voicemails. Emails from the bank. Emails from her credit card companies. Emails from Harrison Pike's firm. The courier had already rung the doorbell. The envelope was in Preston's hand. She came unglued. She tried to drive to my house. Her car, the Range Rover she had leased through the company, had already been electronically flagged and was being tracked for repossession. She got to Beacon Hill, but the front door was locked and the security system had been updated. She pounded on the door for 20 minutes, screaming my name. A neighbor called the police. Caroline was given a formal trespass warning on her grandmother's front step. She tried to go to the office. Her keycard had been deactivated. Security at Whitcomb Publishing had been notified. She was escorted out of the lobby by a very polite young man named Miguel, who had been with the company for 6 years and who had always liked Caroline, but who, that morning, had been shown the photograph of me on the floor. By that evening, the story was everywhere in the Boston publishing community. By the end of the week, the Ashford family had retained their own attorneys and were seeking to distance themselves from Preston's marriage. By the end of the month, Caroline had been served with divorce papers. And through it all, she never once apologized to me. Not once. Not in the first week, when she left voicemails screaming that I was a vindictive old witch. Not in the second week, when she hired an attorney to sue me and was told by 3 different lawyers that she had no case. Not in the third week, when she finally understood that the woman she had underestimated had outmaneuvered her in a single night. It was Preston who came to me, 9 days after the birthday dinner, with tears in his eyes, begging me to reconsider for the sake of their son. I listened to him in my parlor for 40 minutes. I offered him tea, and then I told him gently that I would protect Theodore. That Theodore's inheritance was already secured in a trust he could not touch. That I would pay for Theodore's education, his healthcare, and a modest allowance until he was old enough to make his own choices. But that Caroline was no longer my granddaughter in any meaningful sense, and no amount of pleading would change that. Preston wept. I offered him a handkerchief. And then I walked him to the door. 6 months later, Caroline was working as an assistant at a small literary agency in Providence, Rhode Island. Not a vice president. Not an executive. An assistant, making coffee, answering phones, filing manuscripts. The job paid $34,000 a year. She lived in a 1-bedroom walk-up apartment above a sandwich shop. She rode a bicycle to work because she could no longer afford a car. The Wellesley house had been sold to cover the loan. Preston had custody of Theodore 4 days a week. I know all of this because I had Harrison keep tabs on her. Not out of vindictiveness. Out of responsibility. I wanted to know if she ever truly changed. And slowly, over the course of that year, something did shift. Preston told me, one afternoon in my parlor, that Caroline had begun attending therapy twice a week. That she had joined a support group for people with alcohol dependency. That she had stopped drinking entirely. That she had taken Theodore to the park every weekend without fail, even when it was raining. That she had started reading to him from Anne of Green Gables at bedtime, the same book I had once read to her. I did not respond to any of this. I simply listened. And then, on a cold morning in February, 14 months after my 70th birthday, a letter arrived at my brownstone. It was handwritten on plain white stationery. It was 11 pages long. Caroline had written it, she said, not to ask for anything, not to beg, not to negotiate. She had written it because she had finally understood what she had done, and she wanted me to know that she understood, even if I never forgave her, even if I never read another word from her again. She wrote about the night of the dinner, about how she had been drinking too much for years, about how Preston's family had been mocking her, calling her a nepotism hire, saying she would never amount to anything without me, about how the resentment had built up until it had poisoned her, about how she had lain in bed at night hating me for being alive, because as long as I was alive, she would never be her own person. She wrote about what it had felt like to watch her life collapse, about how she had raged at me for 6 months before she had finally looked in the mirror, about how Theodore had asked her one night, in his small, clear voice, why great-grandma didn't come visit anymore, and she had not been able to answer him, about how she had sat on the floor of her bathroom and wept until she could not breathe. She wrote about the work she was doing in therapy, about how she had come to understand that I had not taken anything from her, that I had simply stopped giving her things she had never earned. That the burden I had been was not the burden she had accused me of being at the dinner table. The real burden had been on me, carrying her through a life she had refused to carry herself. She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not ask for her inheritance. She did not ask to come home. She asked only that, if I ever found it in my heart, I might allow Theodore to know his great-grandmother while I was still alive. Because Theodore, she wrote, deserved to know where his mother had come from and who I was and what a remarkable woman had built the family he was now a small part of. I read the letter 3 times. I put it down. I walked to the window of my parlor and looked out at the bare trees of Louisburg Square. I thought about my daughter Margaret, who had died too young, who would have been heartbroken by all of this. I thought about the little girl with blonde pigtails who had clutched a teddy bear the first night she came to live with me. I thought about the woman in the champagne dress who had slapped me to the floor. And I thought about Theodore, who was now nearly 5 years old, and who had my daughter's eyes. I picked up my fountain pen. I wrote a short letter back. 2 paragraphs. I told Caroline that I had received her letter, and that I had read it carefully. I told her I was not ready to see her, and I did not know if I would ever be ready. But I told her that Theodore was welcome in my home any weekend she could arrange it, and that I would send a car for him myself. I signed the letter Grandmother, not Eleanor. Not Mrs. Whitcomb, Grandmother. Because whatever else Caroline had done, she had given me a great-grandson, and I would not allow my heart to close entirely. Theodore came to visit me for the first time the following Saturday. He was wearing a little blue coat and holding a picture he had drawn for me in his small fist. I met him at the front door. I knelt down, wincing only slightly at the old pain in my ribs, and I opened my arms, and he walked into them without hesitation. As I held my great-grandson in the foyer of the house where I had lived for 47 years, I thought about the woman Caroline might become, given enough time. I did not know if she would ever truly be my granddaughter again. That was a door I was not yet willing to open, and perhaps never would. But I thought about something my own grandmother had told me many years ago. On a porch in a small Vermont town, when I was a young girl learning about the world, she had said that forgiveness is not a gift you give to the person who wronged you. Forgiveness is a gift you give to yourself, so that the wound does not fester forever. You do not have to invite that person back into your life. You do not have to hand them the keys to anything. But you can forgive them quietly, in your own heart, and walk forward without the weight. I have not yet forgiven Caroline. Perhaps one day I will. Perhaps I will not. But I sleep well at night. I run my company. I have my friends. I have my work. I have a great-grandson who draws me pictures and calls me Grandma Nor, which is what Theodore decided to call me the first day we met. And if any of you watching this have raised a child or a grandchild who has come to believe that your love is a debt they are entitled to default on, I will leave you with the only wisdom I have left to offer. Love is a gift. It is not a mortgage. The hand that feeds is not the hand that owes. And the woman who built the table is the woman who decides who gets to sit at it. My name is Eleanor Whitcomb. I am 71 years old, and I am still the head of my own table.